In response to the weekend in Los Angeles, California Governor Gavin Newsom described the events as illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional. And it is certainly true that LA had amazing 360-degree views of immorality all weekend long, but as Jonathan Turley describes in his writing on the story, Gavin wasn't talking about burning cars or chucking rocks at police or shooting fireworks at them or the unhinged mass destruction of property in general, much of it completely unrelated to the political dispute itself. Gavin was talking about Trump deploying the National Guard to help stop all of that chaos. Now, as we'll get to, his legal argument is pretty flimsy, but the moral argument that he's invoking is even thinner. What moral truth was violated here? The right of mob rule? The sanctity of the Mexican flag? Was it the human right to an iPhone, finally unshackled from Apple's oppressive clutches? Or maybe the sacred tradition of unhindered stilt walking in the middle of a public thoroughfare, although I think it was actually LAPD that cut this national hero off at the very tall knees. Whatever this confused moral framework is, Gavin Newsom's California Justice Department diverted at least some of their attention and resources to it instead of the rampant criminality on the streets, because over the weekend, California Attorney General Rob Bonta was apparently hard at work writing up a lawsuit complaint to take Trump out the tested and reliable way by whining to some ideologically aligned federal district court judge. The lawsuit was filed first thing Monday morning, and it is a comically bad piece of writing, as bad politically as it is legally and factually. Now, as a governor, I can fully understand protecting your own authority in your own state. It's just, there is an order of operations here. Even if you do think Trump overstepped legally, the smart move politically and as a servant of your state is just to say, okay, there is a mess and an emergency right now, so California law enforcement and yes, the California National Guard will work together with Trump to stop the insanity. And then, once order is restored, we'll have a conversation about proper authority over the California Guard and expectations for their deployment in the future. That way, you don't look like you care more about illegal immigrants and getting Trump than you do your own citizens. The problem, though, of course, is that Gavin Newsom and company absolutely care more about illegal immigrants and getting Trump than they do their own citizens. But before we can understand the legal theory of the challenge, we have to understand the legal theory of the Guard deployment itself. So to recap, the insanity started on Friday with a mob harassing and obstructing ICE raids in LA. The chaos continued for over 24 hours, and so late Saturday, Trump issued a memo to Defense Secretary Hegseth authorizing him to oversee the deployment of National Guard soldiers to protect federal personnel and property. The memo cites federal law authorizing this presidential power, 10 U.S.C. 12406, which allows a president to deploy the National Guard himself without the request or approval of a state's governor in cases of rebellion against the authority of the United States. And so, by Sunday morning, California National Guardsmen were out at the already heavily vandalized federal building in downtown LA, where these arrested illegal immigrants were detained, and by all accounts, they did exactly as directed. They didn't go into LA more broadly and start roughing up the opposition for fun, they just stood guard, protecting federal personnel and property from the most severe threats, like insufferable Maxine Waters heckling.
I don't know why you're in my city. The governor was not contacted. You going to shoot an elected official? If you shoot me, you better shoot straight.
Not since Joseph Rosenbaum have I heard such eager begging.
Shoot me, nigga! Shoot me, nigga!
A kindred Maxine spirit gone too soon. Or gone exactly at the time requested. Of course, it's the legal theory of the Guard deployment that Newsom is challenging, but not before a ridiculous rewriting and retelling of the facts first. The lawsuit complaint makes stylistic criticisms that are actually of no legal relevance. It says ICE showed up Friday and started their raid operations in, quote, military style. Whatever that means. Are you saying if they had just dressed like dads in polos and cargo shorts and Crocs that you would have been fine with it? No, of course not. Given the reaction, military style was the correct choice. There weren't enough weapons and armor, actually. Regardless, aren't all police military style? If you're doing anything by force, and that's what law enforcement is, it is subduing the non-compliant, there are necessary tools of the trade. Well, yeah, but that makes people scared. the complaint reads. It prompts fear and terror. Again, so what? The law doesn't say deport the illegals unless they're really, really afraid. Isn't some fear of breaking the law a good thing anyway? Because it might stop you from breaking the law. Yeah, well, ICE didn't even inform the California or Los Angeles governments that they were doing these raids anyway, and that made things very chaotic. As though California or LA would have assisted, they would have brought the mob harder and faster. And that's why ICE established a perimeter when they got started to try to repel such developments. But this complaint criticizes them for that too. And they don't care about safety at all, which is why they took precautionary measures to separate the general public before starting. As though that isn't contradictory enough, though, this complaint gets much worse in arguing with itself. ICE has created such an unsafe, hazardous environment, but also, come on, what's so bad about this unsafe, hazardous environment? It's not even as crazy as 2020. This barely even counts as a Summer of Love sequel. Well, it sounds like you owe ICE a thank you for getting the block party started then, but whatever. The point is not the style with which the law enforcement was done. The legal point is the legitimacy of the law enforcement itself, or not. And to that point, after 12 pages, Gavin and his attorney general finally get to it. There are two primary reasons why Trump's National Guard move is illegal, according to the state of California. Point one, Trump's citation of that federal law authorizing this action is inapplicable because this is not a rebellion. Because actually, a rebellion, according to their law dictionary, means an organized attempt to try to change the government or leader of a country through violence. Well, as long as we're being technical, the federal law in question reads rebellion against the authority of the federal government, not against the person, but against the legitimacy of federal jurisdiction. Any honest reading of that clause would understand it to mean violent resistance to valid federal law enforcement. If they meant only the direct attempt at the president's office or the president's life, they could have specified that, and they would have, considering they specified other scenarios that apply too. That's the other legal problem with this case. Even if you don't think this is actually a rebellion legally, okay, what about a foreign invasion? That also establishes authorization for presidential deployment of the Guard. What about just inability to enforce federal law with the usual forces? That also establishes authorization. Even if Trump has more ICE or DHS personnel across the country, it takes time to pull them off their existing duties and get them there. The California National Guard was almost certainly more readily deployable to deal with this emergency, as we saw. They got there the next day. The other problem with the argument from just a political credibility standpoint is Democrats have now established the standard that just talking is an act of rebellion or insurrection. Donald Trump was criminally charged for what he said on January 6th, and states attempted to remove him from the ballot under that legal theory. Talking in too harsh of terms is insurrection. So rebellion is speech that may lead to violence indirectly, but rebellion is not the violence itself. That's the argument we're supposed to accept. But if that argument is hard to take seriously, well, the next one is even tougher. Praise Gavin Newsom, hero of states' rights. The complaint says that Trump's National Guard deployment is a 10th Amendment violation. Of course, the 10th Amendment says that powers not constitutionally delegated to the federal government belong to the states. On that basis, states hold police power on pretty much all matters internal. Gavin says this federal seizure of power is rejected by our founding philosophy. Constitutional framer James Madison tells us in the Federalist Papers that it's crucial to keep almost all policing in local and state governments that are more accountable to their citizens than the distant feds are. Yeah, cool, Gavin. Now tell me what other powers you'd like to remove from the federal government. Gavin for Doge chairman win. And yeah, I agree with the general states' rights and police powers principle, of course. The problem is, in this context, it is constitutionally illiterate. The 10th Amendment says what? Powers not delegated to the feds are reserved to the states. Well, you know what is a power delegated to the feds, as in Congress? Immigration, as in who is and is not a citizen. Naturalization, as it's referenced in the constitutional text, that is Article 1, Section 8. Congress wrote a law about who can be here legally, and Congress established a police force to enforce that law. Congress holds the constitutional authorization to do all of that. They did, and then they wrote another law that gives the president the authority to deploy the National Guard to see to the safety of the federal personnel doing that law enforcement. Legal argument over. And even the wisest, unquestionable legal experts recognize that truth. In the LA Times, a paper that hates Trump, the reporting quotes the dean of the University of California Law School, who also hates Trump, not just by assumption, but by the fact he describes how awful of a policy move this was. The reporting ends the story over 30 paragraphs deep with the fact that actually matters. Unfortunately, says this very learned professor, President Trump likely has the legal authority to do this. And so Gavin is reduced to arguing in court about what might happen, not what actually has. Well, with authorization to deploy National Guard troops wherever reasonably necessary to ensure the safety of federal law enforcement personnel and property, who knows? Pete Hegseth could deploy them wherever, whenever, just places he expects protests to happen. Not even where they're actually active. There is no restraint here. It's ambiguous and open-ended, except the very same page of this complaint describes the limitations. Any guard deployment must be directly related to federal immigration enforcement. It's not just policing whatever he feels like, and it's time limited. This is a 60-day order. Well, yeah, but just imagine, if we don't stop Trump now, then we might have National Guardsmen assisting with immigration enforcement all the time. It won't be just this once, it'll be routine. Well, sure, if you keep threatening and obstructing valid immigration enforcement, then yeah, that's what the law says, and it's what it's designed to stop. If you want them to lay down their rifles, lay down your rocks and Molotovs, and it's over. Well, okay, but still, think of the resource drain. With Trump taking control of the California Guard, they won't be able to assist with other emergencies like wildfires. California won't be able to protect itself or its citizens. Yeah, well, with the riots and the fires and other disastrous events, we've all seen the California record on protecting its citizens. What you're calling fear for the future, we call yesterday's news headline. Regardless, you don't sue for what might happen anyway. You sue for what has, unless you're not actually trying to win and you're just using the court for political strategy, which is its own misuse of your office. And it's hard to worry about what might happen anyway when it already has before, legally. Newsom's argument is so incoherent and contradictory that he calls Trump's move unprecedented while also describing the precedent. Lyndon Johnson did it in 1965. He deployed the National Guard against the wishes of the Alabama governor to protect civil rights protesters. Well, this is unprecedented, except for the precedent. Okay, so you just mean rare, but rare doesn't mean illegal. It just means uncommon. But uncommon measures are often a response to uncommon circumstances. It is also historically uncommon for a governor to just watch his major city on fire, descending into violent chaos, and not deploy the National Guard himself to deal with it. So for all the fear-mongering about what might happen if Trump deploys the Guard, there is equally, if not more valid fear for the opposite course. What if Gavin Newsom is empowered to undo valid federal authority himself? And again, don't get me wrong, I am 100% pro 10th Amendment and states' police powers, but the federal government does exist for a valid, though narrow, reason, and part of that reason is immigration and borders. If the federal government doesn't control immigration, then one state like California can flood the rest with foreign invaders. Oh, just imagine if the National Guard comes in, he warns. Yeah, sure, Gavin. Most of us in the rest of the states are worrying about the opposite. Just imagine if they don't. We're not even worrying anymore, actually, because we've lived that scenario for several years, and we're done with it. And hey, speaking of poor state management, even if Gavin does win with this lawsuit and he gets an injunction against Trump's National Guard deployment and Trump has to stop doing that, so what? Gavin gets nothing out of this case. It's just another paycheck for Sacramento lawyers already leeching off the taxpayer. But will ICE stop? Will these immigration raids stop? No. Trump will just send bigger, stronger, better DHS and ICE forces, and then you'll have to make up some new excuse about why people here illegally can't be deported, even though they very clearly legally can and must. And all of this from a guy who presumably wants and plans to run for president. Instead of targeting issues where Trump is vulnerable, Gavin picks the fight on the one where Trump is strongest. It's the one area where Trump has durable majority support. People want bigger boots on this issue, actually, so lace them up, Gavin. It's the politically smart thing to do. And Gavin is slick, so I won't underestimate his ability to talk his way out of even the most complex knots, but with scenes like this, a hostile mob of violent people waving a foreign flag while they bring destruction to your city, if not for the word invasion, what word would you use to describe it? J.D. Vance asked that question this week. Perhaps it'll be these two debating it in a few years for the 2028 election. It'll be a tough one, but Gavin does have an easy out. After just a few more years under his management, we'll all be speaking Spanish by then anyway. So no, invasion, that is a totally inappropriate thing to say. It's pronounced invasion. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on X. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams is live on Wednesday and Sunday nights. Looking forward to it. Come on. Hey, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, that means you probably found some value in the video. If you found some value in the video, please consider supporting my material. You can do that one time or recurring for as little as $1 a month. It not only helps me sustain, but it helps me pay the people who make my videos possible. Linked in the description for you, mattchristiansenmedia.com/support. Thanks for listening.